Hey, Armand here with a special forecast for Saturn in Pisces 2023 to 2026. Saturn enters in March of 2023, and then he exits in 2025, retrogrades back in, and then he finally exits in February of 2026. Now, you know who else is in Pisces? That is Neptune, the ruler of Pisces. And Neptune and Saturn are going to do this little dance in 2025 where they're coming in and they're going out. And then they really, together, they leave Pisces and they march, good word, they march into Aries in February of 2026. So Neptune's been in the sign for a long time, since about 2011. And Jupiter's recently been in the sign back in 2022. And now we have Saturn coming in, sort of the cleanup crew, if you will. So Saturn leaves Aquarius, goes into Pisces, and starts to sort of solidify, well, you know, what he can solidify anyway in Pisces, not the most solid sign. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the general trends for Saturn in Pisces. And then we're going to look at each sign, a few little hints for each sign. That'll come later. Now, Saturn isn't thrilled to be in Pisces. It's Neptune's sign or it's Jupiter's sign, depending upon how you look at it. This is not to the liking of Saturn. This is not Saturn's kind of area. It's a very watery sign. It's a mutable sign. Saturn likes solidity. Saturn likes solid stuff. Not exactly Piscean in nature. What Saturn does when he enters a sign, particularly when he comes in behind a planet like Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, is he solidifies things by making rules, laws, and things like that. So the issues that have been around says, okay, well, what are we going to really do about this stuff? We've been talking about this. We've been expressing this. These things have happened. Now, what are we going to do about these things? And so a lot of the issues that Saturn is going to be dealing with in Pisces are old issues. These are not things that you haven't heard about before. I mean, there probably will be some new things as well, but that's not the thrust of it. We've had Neptune, and before Neptune, Uranus go through Pisces. There's plenty of stuff that's happened in Pisces. And now Saturn comes along and says, let's solidify, let's legislate about this stuff. So what are we going to be talking about? Well, first of all, I would have to say the oceans. The oceans are, I mean, that is Piscean right there. Pisces is the oceans. And among other things, oil and oil in the oceans and plastics in the ocean, right? So oceans, the pollution, the changes that have happened to the oceans due to climate, right? Rising seas. This is very, very Neptunian, right? You have Neptune in Pisces, you know, and Jupiter, you know, the oceans are rising. So we've got that to deal with. Saturn's going to say, well, now what are we going to do about this pollution? You know, what are we really going to do? What are we really going to do? Or, you know, is this, you know, okay, put your plastic bottle in the recycling and hope for the best? Or is this like, we're going to have to make some substantial changes? Saturn doesn't care. Saturn doesn't care. Saturn, this is an issue. What are you going to do? He puts it on the table for us. Same thing with oil. Saturn rules oils and all things that are oily, including plastics are made out of oil. So we would look, I mean, I wouldn't speculate on how this is going to go in terms of oil and gas prices, because Saturn, Pisces is also gas. I don't know how, like as in natural gas or gasoline. I don't know. I wouldn't speculate how this is going to go in terms of the economics of it, but what I would see is that there could be some constrictions in output and things like that, and also problems with refinement and supply and things as Saturn goes through Pisces. Another Piscean topic is refugees, right? We've had a lot of issues around refugees over recent years, with first Uranus going through Pisces and then Neptune in Pisces. And so this is a big issue. It's a big issue in the United States with people coming from Central and South America. It is a big issue in Europe with people coming from the Middle East, often by boat. Again, Piscean. And what we have is the question, how are we going to deal with this? And Saturn is there to say, how are we going to deal with this? What rules can we make? What laws can we make about refugees? And how are we going to accept or put up some barriers? Now, Saturn, of course, would love to put up barriers. That's Saturn's thing. But on the other hand, Saturn is also fair. And you can only put up so much of a barrier against the ocean. You know, that whether we're talking about climate change and the ocean rising, or whether we're talking about refugees, we are looking at things that are kind of tidal in nature. And Saturn can do his best, but he can only do so much. The rhetoric that we hear around refugees, they're like the flood of refugees, right? The flood of potential immigrants. There's a tide that is coming in. And so Saturn, being Saturn, is there to stem the tide, to try to put a bit of a valve on who comes in. It's going to be a big process. And no matter where you stand on the issue, you know, whether it's open arms, let everybody in, or whether it's don't let anybody in, you have to admit that there's greater complexity, and we're going to have to figure that out. Saturn rules the legislatures, and I think that that is probably where we're going to see the most activity. So it's not necessarily the sort of thing where we would look for an executive decision. We're going to be looking for the legislature, the bargaining, the crafting of laws, and things like that around any of these issues. But I think refugees will be the one that we'll see most directly. Another very Neptunian, Piscean issue is the opioid crisis. In the United States, it's the opioid crisis. In other places, it's addiction a little bit more generally. And this is very Neptunian Pisces, okay? So Neptune Pisces rules drugs, specifically opioids. And so we're looking at how that is going to play out with Saturn coming into Pisces saying, okay, we've got to put some stops on things. ST words are always very Saturnian, right? Stem the tide, stop the flow. These are the kinds of phrases we'll be hearing in regards to opioids and refugees and everything else. You know, stem the tide, stop the flow. These types of things are what we're going to be looking at. Another issue, a side issue from this, is fentanyl, which is used to cut drugs and is potentially very, very lethal. And that problem is going to be addressed undoubtedly in rather severe terms with Saturn in Pisces. Because why are these other things so nebulous, but somehow or another fentanyl is not? Because it is something that law enforcement can get a better handle on in a very direct way. Notice that a lot of fentanyl comes from overseas. It's actually shipped into the United States. And that's another very Piscean kind of theme that is going there. On a less severe note, maybe since the pandemic, you know, the rate of consumption of cocktails has gone way up. And we're likely to see some things that are going to kind of try to restrict that a little bit. I don't think it's going to come in the form of legal challenges. Even Saturn can only deal with so much. I don't think he wants to stir up prohibition again. But I think that we will see an increased pressure in the area of consumption of alcohol. And I think, unfortunately, we're going to see a little bit of a resurgence of restriction when it comes to cannabis. We've just about got cannabis legal, and now Saturn comes in, and I don't think it's going to be made illegal again in the places that it's legal. I think it's going to take longer to get it legalized everywhere. But Saturn, again, Saturn doesn't play this side or that side. He says, what do you want to do about this? Here's the issue. We're going to make some rules. We're going to make some laws. What do you want to do about it? And it's up to us to make the decisions. I could see where it's going to be a little bit slower with Saturn in the sign. And, it's a little bit ridiculous. I know in my community, they've voted not to have any cannabis dispensaries in my city, which, it sounds all very well and good until you realize we've got like a liquor store on every block, so you can go get yourself drunk and disorderly, and that's okay. Well, it's not okay, but it's something that is allowed, whereas, to smoke a joint and watch a movie and fall asleep is somehow or another considered to be the end of the world. We don't want that in our neighborhood. It's the silliness of saying that this is somehow or another like a dirty sort of drug. But we're probably going to see more of that restriction. Again, in the places where it's already been legalized, you see a little bit more restriction, a little bit more containment of it. What are you going to do? Here's another topic, psychedelics. Now, psychedelics, again, Uranus goes through Pisces in the first decade of the century. Neptune goes through Pisces, and psychedelics are becoming accepted as good therapeutic agents and things that can help people psychologically and spiritually. And thank God, 50 years of absolutely stupid prohibition is starting to be pushed back, and we're starting to see opening up with things. Saturn's going to get in there, and he's going to do his thing, and he's going to, again, put in some rules. It's going to sort of institutionalize psychedelics, if you will. And nothing's good when it's been institutionalized. It's going to put a lot of rules and formalities in place and things like this. It'll mean greater availability, but it'll mean under more strict conditions. Strict. You get it? ST word, strict. So I think that is something that we'll see. Recently, I read in the New York Times that some bright professor someplace is trying to isolate the part of psychedelics, the part of the molecule that helps people to become more flexible neurologically. And so if you can do that, then you could take this medication and become more adaptable and flexible without ever really having the experience. Now, for many of you, that is just obviously patently absurd. That is just not the way it works, folks. But that shows the kind of thing that we would see some of, this sort of, how can we make it safe? How can we make it safe? How could you go, relive some trauma from 3 lifetimes ago that is still messing up your life, but somehow or another make it safe? How can we contact entities from other dimensions, but somehow or another, we're doing it in this little room over here type of thing. We're gonna get a little Saturnian about things that are really not very Saturnian. Another thing that Saturn is going to touch upon is the issue of victimhood. There was a time when people wanted to not be victims. They wanted to self-empower themselves or their group, if they're identifying with a group, wanted to self-identify as empowered. And with the passage of Uranus and then especially Neptune through Pisces, we've had this interesting little flip take place where it's become the case that being a victim is the privileged status. This is the thing. You almost want to be a victim. That is considered to be the more empowered position, which is fairly absurd. And I think that Saturn is going to come in and do a little something about that. I think it's going to put a little bit of a boundary on this whole victimization type of thing. I'm not saying people are not victimized. I am not saying people are not taken advantage of. I am not saying that bad things don't happen to individuals or whole groups because of all kinds of things. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. I'm saying that it's a mistake to consider victimization the privileged status. We don't want to identify as victims. Carolyn May says a lot about this. She talks about woundology. about somehow or another taking the wound and making it into sort of the preferential aspect of your existence. And I think that we're going to step away from that with Saturn in Pisces, and positive sort of change if we can figure out how to make that happen. I want to be empowered, not privileged because of one being a victim. And finally, the New Age and all of alternative spirituality. Now, when Saturn went through Sagittarius a few years ago, more than a few years ago now, but when Saturn went through Sagittarius, we had a little bit of a pruning and winnowing out of what's really working. And I think we're going to have more of that with Saturn going through Pisces. The New Age, all kinds of alternative spirituality, and I mean, everything that is there is, on the one hand, I mean, for me personally, you know, let 1,000 flowers bloom. Everybody puts their stuff out there and you give it a try. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't work, you move on to the next thing. You know, we don't need to place any boundaries on things when it comes to this sort of stuff, right? And it's all very individualized and things like that. However, there is a certain amount of BS out there in the New Age community, and Saturn is going to restrict that a little bit. I don't think that would be a legislative type of thing. Maybe in some places. But I think in general what's going to happen is that if it's just some sort of little fantasy that somebody's cooked up and they're sort of selling it as this new technique, this new approach, and so on, and it doesn't really have anything substantial behind it, it's going to be harder to put that sort of thing across. So I think that the New Age is going to get further restricted. And I think, to tell you the truth, a lot of New Agers, alternative spirituality people, are going to be called to task for the conspirituality that has taken place over the last few years. There's a lot, just if you're not familiar with it, just look it up and you'll get the whole picture there, the whole conspirituality, these spiritual folk who see conspiracies everywhere. It's a great topic. It's a great topic. But we'll let you go get that. If you read my articles on Medium, you'll find some stuff about that. Now, let's start talking about the signs. Let's start talking about the different signs and how this is going to affect us as individuals. Maybe. Of course, you know, it's not really all that individualistic. It's just saying, well, this is your sun sign. This is your rising sign. This is what might be happening. Not all that specific. But it gives you a little bit of a hint. It gives you something to think about. I think, you know, especially as Saturn goes into the sign. Especially, though, this works especially well in this case for your ascendant sign. It's the ascendant sign that this is going to have the most validity for. It's true, if your sun is in some sign, you're going to be feeling a little bit of it, particularly when Saturn actually aspects the sun, gets to the same degree as your sun. And you'll feel a bit of it the whole time that he's in the sign. There's a little bit of that kind of low-level background radiation from Saturn that you're going to feel the whole time. But you'll feel it more directly if it's your ascendant sign. So maybe you want to go look up what your ascendant is on some program that gives you that or something like that. There's tons of websites if you don't know your own. You should know your own. Know your ascendant sign. Know your moon sign. Although how valid this is for moon sign, I don't know. Maybe a little bit. Let's start with Pisces. Pisces, you know, there's the good times and there's the bad time. Neptune's gone through the sign. Jupiter was recently in the sign. You're feeling very Piscean, a little extra Piscean. And here comes Saturn to kind of limit things just a little bit, just to kind of condense and solidify. You know, Saturn is saying you don't want to go too far out there. He's saying that to all of us because that's kind of Pisces' thing, is to get a little bit farther out there. That's the whole thing about the opioids and the booze and the psychedelics and the cannabis, you know, and the New Age spirituality. It's all about getting out there. And Saturn is there for you, Pisces, to be a keel, right? As this boat sails through the ocean, or maybe sometimes slightly above the ocean, Saturn is the keel to keep you on track. And so this is This is the experience for you. I want to say that those of you that have Saturn in Pisces, having been born in the mid-90s or the mid-60s, you're at a Saturn return, and this is going to be a, that obviously Saturn's passage through Pisces is substantial for you in that way. Now, Aries. Saturn is in your 12th house, and it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, but you're likely to feel, believe it or not, you're likely to feel a little bit behind the scenes in your own life. It's not like nothing is going to happen. In fact, quite a bit could be happening in your life. It's not like this slows down the actual pace of events at all. But somehow or another, you tend not to feel that empowered. You're not quite ready when Saturn is in your 12th house. Contrast that with Pisces. If Saturn goes over your ascendant, that's a very, very empowering transit. That's very empowering. Whereas if you're in Aries, particularly in Aries ascendant, Saturn's back in your 12th house, and it just doesn't quite flow the way you'd like it to. Now, watch this annoying thing. I'm going to go back to Aquarius, and I'm going to say that Aquarius, this is in your 2nd house, the house of finances. Now, you know, having Pisces as your house of finances is kind of a mixed bag. I mean, things flow and you don't necessarily need to worry about it all that much. But on the other hand, you may not be quite sure where things are. Well, Saturn in Pisces for you, Aquarius, means pay attention to your finances. Don't overspend, right? One thing about having Neptune or Pisces in the finance area is that stuff can just sort of flow away. You know, what happened to that? I had money and then I don't have money anymore. So Saturn is saying we got to, again, it's putting a valve on things, saying let's not overspend. Let's be sure where our money is going. And, you know, I mean, it can certainly help you in terms of income. You know, you might be focused a little bit more on working and things like that. But it's really saying don't let money dissipate. Don't let your resources in general, not just your money, but don't let your resources dissipate. Pay attention to them. That's the message for Aquarius. Taurus. So I'm jumping back and forth over here. Taurus, this is in your 11th house, and that's the house of friendship, among other things. And, well, you know, we might look at associations and guilds and things like that, or even your long-term goals. I think we're going to look at this in terms of friendship. When Saturn goes through the area of friendship in your chart, what tends to happen is you lose friends, but you lose friends whose time it has come to lose. Now, what you want, this is the house of long-term goals, what big perspective, what you want in terms of friendship, people who share your worldview, people for whom you share, with whom you share that perspective on life, the big issues in life. You're on the same page about things, you know, your tribe, as they say. The people that live down the block and you can hang out with them, the people that are in your building and they're okay, the people you work with, the people you've known since forever, you tend to lose touch with them. Doesn't necessarily mean like you're going to fight with them or anything like that. You tend to just sort of lose touch. Well, sometimes they move away or what have you, but it's friendship. It could be a slightly lonely time in terms of friendship, and that really hurts because friendships, that matters. You know, we don't get, you know, it's all about, you know, people ask me things, or clients ask me, it's all about career and work and finances, sometimes health and family, and of course, relationship. People rarely ask about friends. And yet friends are that substantial support that we have, the connections that tend to be there. So if Saturn is limiting your friendships, that could be hard. That can be hard. But work through it and trust that you're going to find people that you belong with as your friends, not just, you know, randoms that are great for going out for a beer. That's nice too, but you know what I'm saying. Capricorn. This is in your 3rd house, Capricorn. And so you, in a sense, I don't want to say you get a pass on it, but it's a little bit easier than some placements. Might have some issues with the siblings, with the car. and stuff like that. You know, your commute could be a little bit of a hectic thing. Like, you know, how Pisces, Neptune, and Saturn all hanging out together in your third house. Yeah, commuting might be a thing, actually. But we'll leave that be for the second. What I want to say is this would be a great time for Capricorn to get involved in community organizations, volunteering stuff, you know, whatever it is, the local food bank, the pet shelter, whatever it is for you. This would be a good time for you to get involved in the community. Saturn is there. You know, it might be a little bit hard to get started. You know, it might take a while to be accepted. It would be a really worthwhile kind of thing to think about for Capricorn ascendants. Then there's Gemini. You know, this is in your 10th house of career, the area of the chart associated with career. And that is, of course, a little bit more serious. You're very likely to get a reward for the work that you've done in the past, and you're very likely to find that that reward is more responsibilities. And yeah, maybe a little bit more pay or something like that, right? You know, it's more about you're honored for the work that you've done, a little bit less about actually, you know, getting compensated for it. But you know what? Work through it, Gemini. Work through it, go through the whole thing, suffer it out, continue to work, continue to put in the effort. And when Saturn leaves the sign, leaves your 10th house, well, then you'll not have Saturn in the house anymore. You'll probably get a little bit more of a reward then. That's probably what it's coming to. So work through it. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, this is happening in your 4th house of home. Now, when Saturn goes into the 4th house, and of course, you know, even if you're looking at the ascendant, it depends where your 4th house actually begins. It doesn't necessarily begin at 0 degrees Pisces. It probably doesn't. But Sagittarius and Sagittarius rising, the energy here is one that is directed towards home. You typically want to feel, now this is a hell of a thing for Sagittarius, right? To want to feel at home. You want to feel grounded. You want to feel where you belong. You want to be where you belong. And yet Saturn makes that a little bit of a challenge. It could be a time for dealing with real estate issues. It could be a time for fixing up the home. It could be, you know, Saturn rules plumbers. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Neptune rules leaks and things like that, and Saturn rules plumbers. But not everybody, not you. Some people are going to have to deal with it. Not you, Sag. No. And you know, Sagittarius. I mean, if somebody's got to come in and fix your house because there's a major leak and a pipe broke and stuff like that, you know, all things being equal, take a vacation and go someplace else while they fix it, if you got the money. You know who's not taking a vacation? Sign of Cancer, particularly Cancer ascendants. At some point in time, what happens is this is the 9th house placement for you. 9th house has to deal with travel. So when Saturn's in your 9th house, you often cannot travel, at least not as much as you'd like. And if you do travel, it's probably for work as opposed to pleasure. And if you do travel for pleasure, you're liable to be thinking about work while you're away. That's a little bit hard. It could be time to look at, if you're looking at going back to school, this would be a time to take a look at that. It could be the time when you make your application or begin school, or, you know, potentially at least making that decision to go to school. Again, Saturn always gives you the idea, and then he gives you delays that go with it. So it may require a little bit of patience. On the other hand, it's also a time, maybe it's a good time for study of, you know, let's say, it just pops into my head to say yoga, Tai Chi, other systems of thought, foreign to you, whatever is foreign to you. I mean, if you're in India, I suppose yoga is like local or whatever, but it might be time to explore. I wouldn't say just alternative. I would say different from your culture, but still in its own way traditional sources. So like something like Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine. This is, you know, for Western folks, this is stuff that is from another culture, so it's different, but it is traditional Saturn. So it would be something that might work for you. So Cancer, I would say that it might be time to kind of buckle down in the areas of philosophy and beliefs and travel. And it doesn't mean you can't make progress. It just means that, you know, it might not be such a fun time all the time. What are you going to do? Scorpio. This is a fifth house placement for you. Saturn in the fifth house is asking you, Scorpio, Scorpio rising, where are you putting your energies in terms of your creativity? Right? Saturn in the fifth house, Saturn in relation to Scorpio, sort of could shut down creativity for folks, but that's not what Saturn wants to do. It wants to know what your commitment to creativity is. And so that's a question that you've got to deal with as Saturn goes through Pisces. What am I willing to put in order to do my creative things? It also has to do with children, but you have to figure that out on your own. Leo, this is an eighth house placement, Leo. So it would be a good idea. It would be a good idea to look back to the mid 90s and say, what was going on right around that time for me? It's an eighth house placement. It suggests a little bit of therapy, introspection, dealing with your own emotions, dealing with things that might have come from the past, particularly like your own personal past. Although with Pisces, maybe we're looking a little bit more towards a sort of, the larger picture of a larger collective past and past lives and the transpersonal realms and things like that as well. It also suggests on a little bit less interior basis. It's a very interior placement, but on a less interior basis, things like your partner's finances. And of course, you want to be real scrupulously honest and careful when it comes to things like loans, mortgages, credit cards, anything to do with banks, taxes. You've got Saturn in your eighth house, Leo. Be honest on your taxes, right? You don't want to be called to account for things. That's an important point. It's an introspective kind of time, especially, I think this is especially important for Leo ascendants. Leo ascendants are going to feel this much more. I keep saying that, but it keeps being true. If you are a Libra or Libra ascendant, this then becomes a sixth house placement for you. Now, Saturn in the sixth house, first thing is, I would be paying attention to my health, not illness. This is not about getting sick. This is not about getting sick. It is about paying attention to your health and well-being. So for Libra ascendant particularly, you're going to pay attention to your diet. You're going to have a sensible exercise program and things like that. Be aware, be really, really aware that Saturn loves to constrict, and you could really go too far. You don't want to, especially, again, we have the extremes of Pisces. So, as much as Pisces seems to be so much about overindulgence and the extra martini or something like that, Saturn in Pisces could be about the extremes of restriction and not getting enough and so on. Like, it feels good not to have anything, this sort of watch me deny myself all my pleasures, watch me not eat anything, right? That would be a poor and ultimately not very healthy way of going about things. If you do need to go on a real strict diet, with medical attention and stuff like that, this would be a good time. But it's a good time for most Libra ascendants just to be careful and to, adopt a good, healthy diet in a sensible kind of way. Sensible, the key word. And finally, we come to Virgo. No matter which way you were going around the zodiac, we come to Virgo last. It's the sign opposite Pisces. So I must have done this right. It's the sign opposite Pisces, and it is the house of relationship. And so when Saturn goes into the house of relationship, there's a strong desire for relationship and a little bit of fear and trepidation about relationship at the same time. That's Saturn for you. It's the approach avoidance. It's the I want it, but maybe I can't have it kind of feeling. And that is something that Virgos might be dealing with. It could be a time when a good relationship gets solidified, right? This is the time when a relationship that's been working out well can turn into a marriage, if that's your idea of things turning out well. But it is the sort of thing that could happen if a good relationship is happening. Or, maybe you decide to cohabitate. Let's move in together, or let's have a kid or something like that. You formalize things in some way or another if things are going well. If things are not going well, Virgo, this could really be a time when you say, okay, enough is enough, I'm out. And that could, of course, be both difficult and empowering. Saturn gives us a lot of fears about things, but Saturn also can empower us in a way. So that's a good thing. If you're not with anybody at all, then Saturn in Pisces can make you feel like, oh my gosh, it'll never happen. And especially in Pisces, especially with that Neptunian, that Neptune is always ready to make us feel a little hopeless if we will just consent. And I think that is something you have to watch out for. It might take some time. You might have to work on having a relationship. You might have to actually get out and meet people or something along those lines. But it is not something that you cannot do. It is something that you need to work towards. And it could take some time. And Saturn, you know what Saturn likes to say, have patience. All right. If you've watched this far, and if you watched the whole thing, talk about having patience. Saturn's going to pat you right on the back for that.